Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CSA annual meeting of membership meeting. I'm going to give folks a couple minutes to get on to check on. We have over 300 registrations, and I want to give some folks time to get their system started. Again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Community Services Associates, Inc. annual meeting of members of Tuesday, May 3rd, 2022. I'm Larry Mufton, the chairman of the board of CSA, and I'm going to call the meeting to order. The first order of business, I'm going to turn to Carrie Corbett, our secretary, to determine whether we have a quorum.
Yes, Chairman, I'm pleased to confirm that we have met the 20% quorum requirement. And I hold 2,341 proxies for a 41.9% return rate. So we are good to go.
Thank you, Karen. And I understand that that is among, if not the highest return rate we've ever had. I'm very pleased by that based on the fact that we have started using our email system, allowing folks to return their proxies by email. Roughly 50% or so did that. So thank you for that high number. I'm also very pleased by the fact that we had over 300 people register for this meeting. I see we are well over 125 people who have already started signing in, and I'm very pleased that we have that level of interest. I'm hoping more and more will do so as we proceed. So with the establishment of a quorum, we'll move into the official part of the business. The first thing on the agenda is the announcement of the nominating committee for the Class A and Class B boards of directors. I have appointed Bill Johnson, Director Bill Johnson, as the chairman of the Class A nominating committee with members Rich Spear and Greg Thompson. And I've appointed Jim Caskey and Don Sigmund, who are two of our commercial directors, as co-chairs of the nominating committee for the Class B members. And as far as the Class B members will be seeking commercial members to sit on the board in their 3 seats. There is 1 seat available. And the Class A nominating committee will soon be seeking applications for people who are interested in serving on the board of directors of CSA as residential property owner representatives. For those of you out there who are listening, I do hope that you will take an interest in, particularly if you've served on a committee already and have some knowledge of what's going on in CSA. I hope folks will, in fact, consider applying to the nominating committee to be on the slate of potential boards of directors elected. It is a commitment of time that I think you'll find it very worthwhile. And unlike debating things on Facebook, you get actually to debate things in real time and make a difference in the decisions that are made. The next item on the agenda is the board of directors report. First, I'd like to recognize the outgoing board members. This year, with the 2022 slate of directors, we lost 2 longtime members. Barry Barth, who served for 6 years on the board of directors as an RPO Class A member. Barry chaired the communications committee and the MEMP committee. He was a valued member of my executive committee. And we appreciate greatly Barry's service to the board for those 6 years. Wish him well, and I hope he will continue to serve CSA in some capacity. The other board member we lost is Scott Richardson, who served as a resort representative for many, many years. Scott's moved out of Sea Pines and has chosen not to continue serving. But again, Scott served for many years, provided a lot of history since he has been with Sea Pines and the resort for a long time and was a truly valued member of the board. So we thank them. Taking their place are 2 members, replacing through the elections process as the Class A director is Tom Sharp. Tom has owned property in Sea Pines since 1983 and moved permanently here in 2014. He served on the MEMP committee and previously served as the commissioner of the Department of Transportation of Indiana. So we welcome Tom on the board. Tom is currently serving as the chair of our MEMP committee. Also joining the board as replacing Scott Richardson as a resort representative is Cliff McMacken. Cliff currently leads the resort development here in Sea Pines and in Kiowa, and he's been a Sea Pines resident since 2013 and has worked with the resort all that time, working on development and improvements to both Kiowa and here in Sea Pines. So we welcome Cliff's perspective as well. With that, I'm going to turn to the chair remarks. I've got to put these up, so I did take the time to write them out so that I wouldn't miss anything. I was extremely honored to be reelected as a board member in the November 2020 election, and I was equally honored to be reelected by the board to serve as another year as its chairman. I will admit that I was hopeful for both of those results, as I felt an obligation to carry through in finding long-term solutions to the most difficult challenges currently facing our Sea Pines community. But before I talk about the future challenges, I do want to highlight the board's several important achievements from last year, all in my mind, maintaining Sea Pines as an attractive community, enhancing the value of all properties, and providing a safer environment for property owners in and visitors to our community. Obviously, one of our greatest achievements in 2020 came from you, the members. That is, those who participated in the critical infrastructure referendum in record numbers. Over 60% of you returned your ballots, and 88+% approved the proposed covenant amendment. Your clear expression of a willingness to increase your financial obligations to Sea Pines in order to assure that our roads, bridges, leisure trails, and drainage systems are maintained in first-class condition has provided this board with a much greater optimism for future efforts when a clear need exists to increase revenue to meet our financial challenges. Admittedly, the referendum results remain tied up in litigation, which I continue to believe will be resolved in CSA's favor before the end of the summer. But those of you who are in residence at any time during the next several months can see the fruits of your vote, as the rebuilding of the roads, leisure trails, and underground drainage system along North Sea Pines Drive from approximately 1.3 miles of north of the Sea Pines to the Ocean Gate to the Lighthouse Road intersection nears completion. The result of this critical infrastructure work brings significant improvements in safety on our roadways and our leisure trails, and much improved drainage for the area around the community in that area during heavy rainfalls. Sam Bennett and our CSA Sea Pines staff are already planning for the next phase of their work on critical infrastructure improvements, as we fully anticipate having the funds needed to start those efforts well before the end of the year. While the critical infrastructure referendum passage was certainly a highlight of 2021, it was hardly our only accomplishment. I'd like to highlight a few of the board's actions that I hope you will agree are designed to maintain and even improve upon the Sea Pines lifestyle for all of us. First, we tore down the eyesore that was the Gallery of Shops building and replaced it with a very attractively landscaped area. We will continue as a board to consider the best alternative for the use of that property as part of the overall consideration of improving the Greenwood corridor entrance into Sea Pines. Second, we adopted noise regulations for higher commercial use of leaf blowers that will become effective on January 1, 2023. This is the first step in curbing the noise levels and environmental impacts of our leaf blowers used on a regular basis throughout the community. Next, we adopted simplified and strengthened land use management and safety and security rules, highlighted by a clear and well-documented set of enforcement tools. I'm very pleased to report that while the number of violations identified by our land use monitor has not abated, the response to his violation notices have generally been very prompt mitigation of the problems he has identified, given the new enforcement opportunities he has. Next, we adopted new parking regulations for short-term rental properties that are designed to assure that the number of cars parked in our neighborhoods by renters is consistent with the hardscape of the rental property. Admittedly, enforcement of these rules is placing a burden on our security team, but it is clearly necessary to retain some level of order in those neighborhoods with a high number of short-term rentals. We successfully instituted online voting for our board of directors elections and again for submitting proxies for this meeting. I'm pleased to note that in both cases, we had a very high return rate, much higher than usual, thanks to the ability of you, the members, to vote online. While I admit I've been somewhat surprised by the number of members who still use the old-fashioned way, snail mail through the US Post Office, to vote or return proxies, our hope is that over time, we can save money and make this process even more efficient by encouraging the use of these online voting tools. Finally, our governance committee adopted for board adoption several key improvements in our governance structure. We clarified by the board and strengthened our conflict of interest rules and procedures, and we also adopted committee best practices among those improvements suggested by our governance committee. And I'm particularly proud to note that all of these achievements occurred during the ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which continues, unfortunately, to impact our staff and committee members. It's no secret that our current challenge is finding new revenue sources to fund our ongoing operational requirements. Simply stated, our annual assessments capped at an inappropriately and inapplicable CPI adjustment will not provide enough funds for our growing operational needs to meet the demands of a fully occupied Sea Pines community. As more of our residential property owners are residing on Sea Pines for longer periods of time, due in part to the COVID restrictions that they had to deal with, and we are experiencing a continual increase in the number of non-property owning renters and visitors in Sea Pines, we are simply suffering from a generalized labor shortage and competition from neighboring communities offering higher pay rates. Among our greatest needs, our security staff is being relied on more than ever to provide the first line of law enforcement services to Sea Pines, as our county sheriff's department struggles to reach full staff on its own. And with the rising number of visitors, both in short-term rentals and daily passes, we have a growing need for additional security, maintenance, and operating personnel, as well as for capital to address needs not covered by the critical infrastructure funding approved by the referendum. New revenue to meet our staffing challenges is not our only concern. A fully occupied Sea Pines presents other challenges. We will continue to work closely with the town management to develop and hopefully quickly implement some solutions to the traffic exiting onto Sea Pines Circle. I should note, while any of us who worked in urban environments need to remember the length of time it might take to go a few blocks at various times of their workday, there is no doubt that the 5-minute wait to get out of Sea Pines occurs far more often than in the past. And we do need to find solutions that make the phenomenon more of a rush hour problem than a regular one. While our gate fee revenues have increased over the last few years, and we can look to increase some of those fees to provide additional revenue, that approach alone will not suffice. I therefore remain very hopeful that the board will take up several of the 2021 Revenue Task Force's proposals over the next few months. Look, I understand no solution will be acceptable to all of our members. Our membership interests are simply too diverse to expect unanimous support for whatever we choose to impose. But I do hope that the recognition of the need for additional revenues to maintain and support Sea Pines will work to allay some of the concerns for the revenue resources that are finally adopted. We also continue to research the rapidly changing technology related to e-bikes in order to respond to the growing desire for many of our members to use e-bikes in our community. As our ability to distinguish these modern bikes from traditional ones becomes even more difficult, we must find a way to satisfy our members' desire that we accommodate all types of bike technologies, but most importantly, while keeping our leisure trail safe for pedestrians and bicyclists of all types. The lack of adequate parking in our commercial areas and around our beach access points has become a significant issue given Sea Pines' occupancy levels over these past few years. Given this lack of parking in many areas, we will continue to look at solutions for moving property owners and their guests, including families and renters, to these commercial areas and beach access points in a way that does not unduly disrupt surrounding neighborhoods. Parking is going to continue to be a premium throughout Sea Pines, folks, whether it's for property owners or guests, and this is a challenge I hope we can address this year as well. I'm sure that other issues will come up during the year for the board to consider. I have been gratified by the number of property owners who are taking the time to address their concerns directly to me or Sam Bennett, rather than debating them on some social media platform where there is simply no likelihood of a resolution. And we try to respond to each of those inquiries on a timely basis or through my monthly letter. I hope members will continue to do so at chairmancsacpines.com. And in that regard, at the end of today's meeting, when the official part has adjourned, we are going to open the floor for comments directly to us by any member who desires to do so. You'll do so by raising your hand on the Zoom platform that you are using, or if you are on listening to us on a phone, by dialing *9 to raise your hand. We will be keeping those in the order in which the hands have been raised, and everyone who has raised their hand will have an opportunity to speak directly to the entire meeting, and Sam or I and Victoria will do the best we can to answer your concerns, and if we can't, we'll work to find the answer for you. I appreciate your time today, and I'd like now to turn to Victoria Shanahan.
Still to do number 4.
Yep, we skipped
Date of
over
record.
data record for the election.
Oh, okay, I'll go back to that then. Before I get to the financial report, I missed one of the issues that we need to address on the agenda, so I'm going to go back to number 4. I was so eager to speak to you all. The date of record for the Board of Directors election of 2022 will be October 1, 2022. So for those people who own property in Sea Pines, that is the date on which their eligibility to vote will be determined. If you don't own property in Sea Pines on that date, you will not be eligible to vote. And if you acquire property after that date, you will not be eligible to vote unless you obtain the ballot from the owner as of October 1. Now, I'd like to turn for our financial report to our Director of Finance, Victoria Shanahan.
Thank you. I know that the agenda calls for Dave Borghese, but unfortunately he's out of the country, so you have me today. So, and we have Leanne Leahy as she's in the room with us, and she is representing the Finance Committee. So good morning to everyone. Amanda, can you put up the first slide for me? I'm going to be brief. I just did a very simple pie chart to show you all where the money came from in 2021. Obviously, the majority is coming from residential assessments, 47%. Daily gate revenue at 29%, and that short-term rental passes at 11%. Next, please. And then where the money went. Okay, we go to the maintenance department, safety and security, general administration, and you see that major repairs and replacements. That's what your major, your roadways, your boardwalks, your leisure trails, that's what encompasses all of that. And we were, with the increase in gate, able to absorb that tropical storm Elsa expenditure. And you'll notice I put a note at the bottom. If you take out depreciation, Elsa, and major repairs and replacements, you've got $11,591,000 in expenditures. $6 million of that is payroll. And only, well, I shouldn't say only, but 5.5 is operating costs. So that's a kind of a significant percentage.
Victoria, if I can add, under that operating cost, I'll just remind the community that many of those operating costs used to be personnel costs, but we've moved those to contract services. So those are still things that we're doing as a community that would have been personnel costs under our old budget, but now under this budget, they are contracted costs for Brightview, tree services, those things that we decided that makes more sense to send out. So they're not things that we have the ability to stop doing, but there are things we were doing, we're just doing it in a different way through the third party now.
That's correct. Thank you, Sam. All right, and now I'm going to just move into the 2022 budget. Again, where the money comes from, the majority is, again, residential assessments. One interesting fact is I looked up, and 20 years ago, the residential assessments made up over 60% of the revenue coming in. So we've done a good job of trying to find other sources of revenue other than being so reliant on those residential assessments. Again, we are budgeting for a steady gate revenue in comparison to 2021, as well as short-term rental, as well as annual passes. Again, now where we're anticipating the money to go. Again, a little pie chart. You see that major 38% is that major revenue, major repairs and replacements. That's what Larry was just referring to about us spending those infrastructure dollars on our roads, the stormwater, the leisure trails, the complete reconstruction of these primary roads. I did want to point out one thing that we did as an operational change for 2022 is we moved the Brightview contract, which is our largest contract, as well as some community development activities that were previously recorded in maintenance, and we moved them over to general and administrative and call them community development activities. That's why you'll see that increase in general and administration dollars and decrease in the maintenance dollars from 2021. Again, the note at the bottom indicating if you take out depreciation and the projects, $11,312 are budgeted, priced approximately 6.2 in payroll and 5.1 in operating costs. That's my report, so thank you. I'm here for questions.
Thank you, Victoria. I'm now going to turn it over to our president for the president's remarks, Sam Bennett. And I want to note, Sam has now made it through 2 years. Congratulations, and his services cannot be the value of his service cannot be overstated. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. I'll be brief so we can get to the question and answers, which I know where everyone wants to turn to. A couple of things before I get sort of the meat of my conversation. First, Tower Beach. I hope folks have seen the level of quality in terms of the services we've been providing at Tower Beach with our staff on site at the guardhouse, as well as our cleaning services. We've taken all the cleaning services at Tower Beach back in-house and have gone from 3 days a week to 5, 6, and it will be 7 this summer as use ramps up. The goal is always to provide higher level of service and better quality for our members. And I think we're seeing that, and we're going to continue to strive to do that. The other thing that some of the members who are more tenured than others like myself, who've been here just a couple of years may notice, is we've begun referring to ourselves to the community as Sea Pines Community Services. And we're doing this intentionally. Our legal name has not changed from Community Service Associates. That's who we are. That's who we're going to be. But our community has turned over with new property owners at a tremendous rate over the last 2 years, upwards of 20-25% of new members of this organization. And it's very hard for folks to get their minds around new members coming into the community, what our role and responsibility is to Sea Pines when they just hear CSA. So this is really a goal for us to do a better job of communicating who we are as an organization and what we are to the members and the property owners of the community. And you'll hear more about that in the future. It's a very slow rollout. We're taking our time to do that because we don't want to have to go through an expensive rebranding process, but we will do it over the course of the next 2, 3, 4 years. The goal being to better explain to the property owners that are coming into the community what we do and who we are and how we do it. Turn to a couple of the key issues for me moving into 2022. I will echo the chairman's remarks earlier about the critical infrastructure referendum and the focus on the infrastructure needs of the community in 2020 and 2021. I'm very pleased with the work that's been done at North Sea Pines Drive. I don't mind telling the community what we found there was much worse than we expected in terms of what needed to be repaired. And unfortunately, what that means is we'll have the same situation all the way down Sea Pines Drive because of the intensity of the saltwater action coming through there with the tides, as well as the fact that most of that property along Sea Pines Drive is basically beach sand. And that has created significant challenges when we're rebuilding and excavating those roads. It's something we hadn't experienced before. The community didn't experience it on Greenwood Drive coming in with that rebuild, but it's something we're going to be dealing with until we get to the end of Sea Pines Drive at South Beach. So more to come on that as we work with our engineers and update the processes and the plans for moving down Sea Pines Drive to continue that reconstruction process. Having said that, the two things that I'd really like the community to think about moving ahead into 2020 that weren't part of the critical infrastructure piece are the gate reconfigurations and traffic associated at the gates. We kept the infrastructure focus for the 2020 referendum, specifically on what we call critical infrastructure, roads, bridges, drainage, lagoon dredging, those things that we needed to deal with traffic and stormwater inside the community. But the biggest challenge we have as a community moving ahead that's not funded are the gates. And we've got to find some solutions to get our property owners and members and guests into this community in a much more efficient and effective manner, particularly on the Greenwood Gate. And that's going to take resources to do that. So you will hear us as an organization talking much more about that, beginning to look for solutions in a very transparent and open way, engaging the community in that, and trying to find the appropriate level of funding to do that. Like all things on Hilton Head and in this area, it will not be inexpensive, but for the long-term future of the community and the quality of life for our property owners, it's something we've got to do. And so more to come on that as we work through 2022. And then the last thing I want to just lead the meeting with and my remarks with our employees. I asked Victoria to break down the personnel and the operating costs associated with the 2022 budget and 2020 budgets, so you could see just how labor intensive our organization is. We're an organization that has folks that do things. We provide community services. That's what our name is. And it takes people to do that. And we are in an extremely competitive job market right now for employees. And so the wage pressures that we have, we're going to be looking to the community for additional resources to do that as we add to the current wages of our current employees so we can keep them. The community has changed over the last 10 years in terms of the growth, but the needs have also changed. But if you think about it, outside of our gates, it has really changed. There are so many more opportunities between I-95 and Sea Pines now for folks to go to work. And we compete with every job opportunity between here and the interstate. So we have to have our employees want to come and make the 45-minute, hour and 30-minute drive to come to work and be part of this community, part of this organization. And folks are there to earn a living. And so it takes dollars to do that. So you will see us doing more of that, talking to you about it, looking for ways so we can continue to be competitive for our employees and our staff. And then also find ways to secure additional employees, additional resources, particularly on the safety and security and the land use management side. As we have more folks coming in, we do have a need for more employees to handle those increased volumes of traffic and crowds. It's not a bad thing. It's just the reality of what we're dealing with on a daily, weekly basis. And we need folks and we need people willing to come and do that. So those are the two biggest unfunded, in my mind, unfunded liabilities that we as a community have going ahead would be the traffic at the gates and making sure that we have the ability to pay our employees a very competitive wage, the most competitive wage, as well as hire the employees we need to maintain this community in a way that our members and our property owners appreciate. So happy to answer any questions, look forward to answering questions, and appreciate the opportunity to serve the members of this community, our property owners, as well as work with the employees of Sea Pines Community Services. They're great men and women, and they come to work each day to serve y'all, and I appreciate them very, very much. So those are my remarks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much. Great remarks. Appreciate it. And certainly as a chairman of the board, I do appreciate the staff that works with you and under you in getting things done here. That is the end of the formal remarks at our meeting. I'm going to adjourn the meeting now, and we will start to open up the floor for questions and the opportunity to speak directly to Sam and I. I want to remind folks that if you're joining by a PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or Android device with a visual screen, you raise your hand with the raise your hand function in the Zoom webinar platform, and you will be put into the queue. If you're joining by phone only, you may dial *9 to raise your hand, and you can't actually use the phone to lower your hand, so we'll lower it for you. While people are getting in the queue, and I should note how pleased we are at the very large response of participants at today's meeting. Well, almost 200 people have signed in, and we assume in some cases it's households, so we're hoping it's even more members. We truly appreciate the fact that people are taking the time to meet with us today. We got 2 questions in advance of the meeting, through questions at CSA Sea Pines. I'll read them because they would, if they were doing so, they'd want to have the entire question read. The first is from Elaine Dowden. We are full-time year-round residents of Sea Pines. I cannot tell you how many times that I have reported all the loud noise coming from that bar area outside Sea Pines. I usually get the same response that since it is not in Sea Pines, little can be done. This seems fairly goofy to me that we full-time residents are subjected to this bar noise often after 11 p.m. We are usually given long lists of do's and don'ts as residents here in order to maintain a pleasant place for everyone, and I certainly appreciate that, Ms. Dowden, and to others who do. Why is it bars just outside the gates are permitted to keep us from being on our decks at night due to the noise? Is it because of all the money made from the drinking at the bars? Oh, well, I know this again will be ignored, but then I am old and a retired RN and feel I too have some rights since I pay hefty yearly Sea Pines dues. I hope I've given your question justice, Ms. Dowden, and know the fact that you are old and retired doesn't in any way diminish your rights as a Sea Pines homeowner and property owner to get your questions resolved as best we can. Sam, I think this is one that probably is better answered by you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the bars are certainly an issue and the noise is an issue. Unfortunately, it doesn't fall under the jurisdiction of Sea Pines Community Services Security, but it does fall in the jurisdiction of the town and Beaufort County. In fact, I spoke to the town manager, Mark Orlando, last week. I too live in the Governor's Road area, in the club course area, and I have the, although I'm not young either, but I'm also not retired. I do enjoy sitting on my deck in the evenings, and I don't need to hear noise and those kind of things. So Mark understands the town is committed to work with us and with, more importantly, the residents and property owners of Sea Pines to address this issue. In fact, I know that they were out there over Saturday night, Friday night, and Saturday night with their code enforcement directly dealing with it. So I am hopeful that with the town's efforts, particularly as it relates to providing business licenses to establishments that may be causing these noise issues, that we'll begin to get some resolution on this issue rather quickly. I don't mind telling you, we're fortunate to have a town council member who lives inside the gates of Sea Pines, Tom Lennox. He and I have also spoke about this, and Tom is committed to have the town's resources helping to solve this problem. If you have any questions outside of what we're doing, I would encourage you also to call the town and let them know of your feelings, and they need to hear directly from you as a citizen and a property owner here on Hilton Head Island.
Thank you, Sam. The next question comes from David D'Amico, and it's regarding low-speed vehicles. During the last meeting, I raised a question regarding low-speed vehicles, or LSVs, and why I see them on the roads being run by the resort and other commercial businesses. The answer I received from y'all stated, and he does say y'all, stated that there was an exemption. However, I do not see anywhere in the covenants stating that this exemption for this practice. I am in fact supportive of low-speed vehicles, but inclusive for all residents as well. They're much smaller, allowing for more parking in places like the Beach Club, where there's a shortage. In fact, since there seems to be a desire to overlook the current covenants and just allow this practice. Perhaps we should consider LSV with a small annual fee to register and limited to only residents of Sea Pines and not their guests. That's from Mr. D'Amico. Again, I hope I've given that justice. So, Mr. D'Amico, first of all, the exemption for commercial and vehicles appears in the rules, the land use management and safety and security rules. And it was done by the committees and the board that adopted those rules in order to recognize the relatively limited use of low-speed vehicles, which is clearly necessary when you've got the various golf courses and the need to move maintenance folks around. So there was a clear need that was identified for the golf course maintenance, which is primarily how they're used by the commercial people. The committees that are the safety and security has looked at this on any number of occasions. We've gotten requests from folks who want to use a moke, which I guess is considered a low-speed vehicle. And the concern is really twofold. One is that defining low-speed vehicles in a way that would limit them appropriately to vehicles that might otherwise go outside the roads is one thing. But you also have to concern yourself, since now, and if you've been in Belfair or any of the off-island communities, there are golf carts. Literally, they are golf carts that are capable of being licensed by the state to operate on roads. And the question that this committee continues to look at is, do we really want their property owners with golf carts running around in sea pines, given the way that our courses are used, where people are moving from course to course? And so given the consideration of what the numbers might be of these low-speed vehicles, the board committees have consistently determined that we should not allow them. Clearly, it's an issue that comes up on a regular basis, and I'm sure the committees will look at it again this year. In light of the desire, if you were at the tournament, you saw a commercial enterprise trying to sell mokes off the 10th fairway. And so it's certainly possible the issue will come up again, but until we could find a way to appropriately limit the use of those low-speed vehicles in a way that would not clog all our roads, that's where the committee is been brought to the come out. So I will make sure the committee sees your comment, and we will certainly ask them to revisit it.
Mr. Chair, the only thing I would add is there's also prohibition in the gate policy for low-speed vehicles outside of commercial use for our commercial entities, and that's where that was the genesis of the land use management rules.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for bringing that additional. Those are the only two questions we received in advance. I'm going to ask Amanda Jones if she has, since she is in control of the webinar, to allow those who have raised their hand to do so and speak to us.
Good morning, Larry, and thank you to all of those who have joined the webinar this morning. Certainly appreciate your participation. As Larry mentioned a bit earlier, we are taking questions at the moment. We are utilizing the raise your hand function in the Zoom platform. So we do have, looks like 2 folks with their hands raised. If you have a question and would like to get in line, we're going to get that queued up right now. So the first folks that I have on that list, it looks like Cal Minster. So I'm going to bring you on, Cal. I have brought you into the webinar to be able to speak. Welcome.
Hi there. I'm actually Alicia. I'm speaking for him.
Here.
Left just for a moment. I had 2 questions. One, in regards to the PPP forgiveness, where were those monies allocated? Because I understand as a business, we received some of that as well. And so we had already budgeted for what we had. And so that money was extra. And so I'm just wondering, with all of the talk of needing money, where that large sum of money went to.
Wait, I'm going to move it over to Victoria, Director of Finance. Go ahead, Victoria.
As you all recall, everything shut down in the beginning. Well, I guess it was starting in March, and our gate revenues just went completely. I mean, there was a day in April where we had sold 6 gate passes in one day. So it was applied for and received that amount of money to help us continue to remain fully staffed. We didn't lay off any employees. We didn't cut back any hours. We were able to use those funds to stay staffed, even though we had that loss in revenue, significant loss in revenue.
Based on your chart, am I correct that it's hard for me to do the math right now, but was it like 300,000 approximately that you bring in gate revenue?
Oh, no.
Or is
like
it more?
3
million.
Million,
And
yeah.
the PPP was a little over 2 million?
1 million, 1.1.
1 million. Okay. So, I mean, I understand it's shutting down. We own property all over the country, but Hilton Head was the only property we had that never stopped as far as renting and still going strong. So I'm just curious, like, was all of that $1 million used to offset the money coming in from the gate passes only, or?
Well, I don't want to waste everybody's time, but yes, a significant amount of that was used to offset that drop in revenue from the gate passes.
Gotcha.
And Victoria, I think it's fair to say that when we applied for relief from paying, the government looked at what we had done with it and was comfortable that we met the requirements.
Absolutely. As you know, and you applied for and probably received forgiveness, it was, you had to provide very ample documentation as to where those funds went and what they were used for. So I had to supply all kinds of payroll records, benefit records, all of that to show, and it was way in excess of the 1.1 that we used the funds for.
Gotcha.
And you
Okay,
had a
well,
you had a second question?
yes, it's about the gate part, the gate passes. It seems like the biggest issue is the traffic during peak time, the time it takes to do gate passes, and then obviously the revenue that's brought in. A couple things. One, have you guys considered an online system where we could send guests to purchase a weekly gate pass so they could just print it out and have it in their home? I would imagine I can't foresee an issue of them being able to not pay for a pass and not have the correct pass if there was like a PDF or maybe a QR code provided or something, so that you could limit the amount of cars having to stop and purchase the pass at the gate. And then also, I've had some guests, actually, it's been most of my guests recently have been like, we've had our owners call in passes for us and they expect me to call in a pass for them. And personally, as a homeowner who doesn't want to have to pay more fees, I'm perfectly happy with having my guests pay $30 a week to park. But I feel like there is a growing number of people who call in passes for their guests, maybe because they don't have a view. And so they want that to be a benefit. Or I've literally, like 9 out of 10 guests said, well, they always just gave us a pass. And so literally called it in. So obviously they're not even paying for it up front.
Well, let me, if I understand your question, a person who is renting, and when you call guests, you're really talking about your renters, people who are renting from you?
Correct.
Okay, people who are renting their property are supposed to register with CSA, which gives them the right to buy for their guests a $15 now during the summer, $17 gate pass. Or if they don't, they can buy they can get it at the window for $20 or $22 during the summer. Or they can simply say you're on your own and they can buy a $30 weekly pass. But they are being paid for. Now, and Sam, I'm going to speak and you can correct me. We monitor people who are calling in property owner guest passes. If for example, if my son is coming to town, I call in a weekly pass for him or 3-day pass. And we monitor. If we find a property owner is doing that on a regular basis and therefore clearly renting it to try and get around the $15 fee, we will call them on it and they will be required to register. So,
and we will suspend their ability to call in passes, and we do run into that on a regular basis. We have a process.
So is it possible that the guests think that they're getting these passes for free, but they're when I just choose to not have to deal with it because I'm not there. So I let the guests pay $30 at the gate and I'm done. If they pay for them in advance, do the guests pick them up at the CSA Center or Greenwood Drive where?
They can buy a voucher for their guests and provide that voucher to the guests, and then the guests can redeem that voucher for the pass at no cost to the guest.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll let that issue go. We've not been owners there for too long, but I am concerned that an online portal hasn't been considered as far as purchasing passes, because I feel like that would really, help the traffic.
Sam, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. We are working on that. That's part of the technology upgrades that our safety and security group's working through. And I hope we'll have more coming out about that at June or July, where we're going to have the online pass ability to our property owners.
That would be great. Okay. And maybe, I don't know if there's a discounted rate for us purchasing them, but if we could do that, I feel like it would tremendously help the traffic problem.
It will certainly help. The biggest challenge we have at the gates are our daily visitors and those folks that are going to come in to Sea Pines. And remember, those gates are not just, they are security gates, but we're a public community.
Right.
We're a gated community, we're a public community. And so when someone pulls those gates and they want a $9 pass and they begin a conversation with the gate attendant that says, hey, how do I get to Harbortown? Or my first time, what's down here? Our gate attendants are also customer service folks. And so they do their best to move folks along, but they also do their best to represent sea pines. And so that's part of our challenge with our gate configuration. What we need to do is we need to get those daily visitors out of the queue to go through the gates themselves, so that those conversations and those past purchases can occur out of the thoroughfare. And that's the challenge we have to address. That's in my mind is the most critical to make traffic flow into our community the way we want it to flow. So those are the things we'll be talking about in the very near future.
Gotcha. I'm sure you've thought of this before, but is there consideration for maybe a kiosk that people can go through, that they're like sent almost like a state park where they're sent through a
Yes.
different lane for daily passes to where
Yes.
they don't get to talk to someone?
Yeah, all of those things will be under consideration, and they have been considered in the past, and they will be certainly at the forefront here in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mentzer. Before we take the next question, I do want to remind folks that this is your opportunity. I know I probably shouldn't invite this, but I know Facebook often complains that folks don't get a chance to talk directly to the chairman or the president during these open meetings. And we still have over 200 people listening. So if you do want to discuss an issue, we are happy to do so. Amanda, what's the next question?
The next question comes from Regan Stray. Regan, I am welcoming you to speak. Welcome.
Good morning, Regan.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's Reagan, but that's all right. It's also
Regan, my
Stry, but
apologies.
that's all right too.
With my last name, I should do a better job of pronouncing others.
Understood. Hey, first off, I want to thank you all for your time and commitment. I know it takes a lot to volunteer and do all that you're doing. My question largely centers around a little bit of the budget detail that was shared, and kind of more through the lens of what sort of trend analysis. I know we saw 2021 versus the 2022 budget. All of this just coming, through the lens of, I know organizations can very easily kind of focus on where the revenue comes from. And obviously as a property owner and in my case, I do not rent, but we're sensitive to just raising the tax, if you will, on the residents, and being good stewards of the expenses. What information can you share about, the comparison from prior years, as well as looking forward to subsequent years of, where we're seeing trends and what we're doing to maintain the cost side as much as we are looking at alternative revenue streams and otherwise. I do have a follow-up question specifically on the major repairs, but anyway, I am just curious about what we're seeing from a trend perspective. Some of these things are jumping quite a bit from 2021 to 22. I personally am just curious, what does that look like if I look 5 years back and 5 years forward?
Reagan, I'm going to turn this to Sam just to note, I'm expecting at the board meeting, we will be sharing, and I think we shared it at the last board meeting, the big trend that we're seeing is in the increase in short-term rentals, which have increased the number of people in Sea Pines at any given time during I'd say peak months, because the peak seems to start in April and end in October. But the big trend that we have seen is the growth in the number of properties that are being short-term rented. With that, there's also been some growth in daily visitors over the last couple of years. So Sea Pines has become a very popular place. Sam, I'll turn the rest to you.
Thank you. So from a revenue perspective, growth is good for us, but it's also a challenge for us. The issues that we deal with as it relates to visitors and guests when they come through the gate, well, they also help us on the growth side, but then they compound the challenges and the need to have employees to provide safety and security. So, and our biggest driver of revenue, I think, as you saw there was the gate in conjunction with the assessments, and the ability of the gate. It's a fixed revenue for us as it relates to the costs that pass through the gate. For those costs to go up, takes a process through the board. So when we budget for the gate, just as we did this year, we last year was our busiest year for the gate revenue. And so we made the assumption that we're going to have the same type of year just to make sure that we didn't leave anything on the table. Because on the other side of that, on the assessment piece, our assessments are limited to the nationwide CPI. So I think our assessment for last year was in the 4% range, Victoria?
No less.
A little bit less, yes.
And so our challenge when you roll those things together becomes, if you look at the nature of our organization, is because we are so employee intensive and operational intensive, that the cost of those employees, because of what's happened with the labor market right now, is outpacing any of those costs associated with the 4% on the assessment, but also same thing on the operational piece. Those contracts that we have with those vendors that are now providing services that used to be provided by employees, well, they're passing those inflationary costs for their services onto us through those contracts. And so
You'd have to pay more for employees too. So
that's correct. So that really is our challenge in the here and now. Having not, you asked a question about trends for 5 years. Vic, I've asked Vic if you got any insight on that. I'm happy to.
The short-term rentals have increased more than 20% over the last 5 years.
So really for us, it boils down to what level of service do we want to provide the community with the resources we have. And if we're at the end of the day, because our assessments are going to be a fixed point, and we know that our folks coming through the gate, whether they're short-term rental or they're daily visitors, we know what that number is. It's pulling out of that box the most services we can provide, or we've actually talked a little bit, if we can't expand that and keep up with the costs associated with our employees and those operating costs, then it becomes a triage of services, right? What's at the bottom, and what did we begin to not do so we can do those things at the top? And that's not where we want to take the organization, because everything that we do, we believe is critical and makes sense for the community. So that's the struggle for us. We don't have hardly any elasticity in those revenues as maybe other folks would, particularly when you compounded what we're dealing with the cost of providing for employees and operations because of inflation. And our market is at the top end of everything else because of where we are on the coast and in the island.
Sure.
Those things.
And I should add, our revenue task force, which spent a lot of time last year, looked at these kind of trends. And then once we thought we had some ideas, we asked Victoria and the staff to dig even deeper. And I think, again, we showed it last month, we'll continue to show it in the coming months. What you're seeing, unfortunately, or fortunately for all of us, Sea Pines is a very popular place to come to as a visitor and to come to as a renter. We don't have the authority or the capability, nor do I have any desire, and I think this board shares my view, to stop people from continuing to rent their properties. But it's hard to argue with the facts, which is 5 years ago to today, that jump in short-term renters has created a significant drain on our staffing employees and needs for more, that if we were back at the old level, probably our revenue requirements from our assessment would not be as damaging, because that CPI just doesn't work. At some point in time, I'm hoping some board will seek a referendum to change the CPI so that it's more realistic, to give more flexibility to boards to raise revenue through assessments and other ways. But at the end of the day, if we want to maintain the Sea Pines lifestyle, we want to maintain a place where full-time residents feel very comfortable, and renters and visitors also feel like they're coming to a family-oriented environment, then we're going to need to have a better source of revenue to maintain a staff that simply the inflationary pressures on salaries and operating costs are well beyond the CPI that the assessment does. Now, having said that, the board has a lot of choices to make, and I know we are thinking about how the impact on anything impacts our property owners. So I can assure you, we've heard from a number of folks through emails and comments and just talking out on the street with our friends and neighbors. And we are going to consider all interests, but at the end of the day, nothing's going to be unanimously acceptable. And we can only hope that those who may bear some burden more than they believe others recognize how we come to that conclusion, and the importance of the need.
So thank you for that. I do have a follow-up question on the major repairs and replacements.
Sure.
Obviously, that was the biggest increase from 2021. And it looks like, well, I would suspect that in that bucket, there's some multi-year projects. What does that particular line item look like headed into 2023? I mean, does that come back down to more traditional levels, or, is the 7.5 million or so expected to continue?
Sam, I'm gonna need some help with this one.
I'm going to turn to Sam. I'm going to turn to Sam as well, given that the assumption of the critical infrastructure
Right.
funds being available and therefore projects that will fund it. But Sam, you want to talk about where the.
Can I just make a statement too, by the way, just so
Sure.
you know where I'm coming from?
Sure.
I welcome and think we need this. For the record, I'm not looking at it as a bad thing. In fact, maybe even a good thing, to make sure that it continues to be a highly sought after place to be. I'm just curious though, do we see that leveling off or otherwise?
When we passed our critical infrastructure referendum, we put a number in place, a goal in place to spend annually approximately $5.1 million over the next 10 years to do infrastructure reconstruction and rebuilding. And that hasn't changed, although I will tell you, with the way the cost of commodities and construction has gone up, that's probably not enough to do the things we wanted to do when we passed the referendum in 2020. This year, the board made the decision to take, because we don't have the resources from the referendum coming into our CSA coffers yet, the board has made the decision to draw down from reserves. And so a big chunk of that 7 million that you see there is the reserves. I think, Victoria, that was approximately $4.3 million.
Correct. And it's multi-year, correct?
And the other piece of that is there's also some carryover from last year that carried over because the North Sea Pines construction took longer than we anticipated. So a part of that $7 million you see is actually carryover from the 2021 budget. And now that project is complete, we're paying that down. So from a budget perspective, it is over a couple of years on the $7.7 million. And it will probably be this year as we look to ramp up in the fall on the next leg of Sea Pines Drive and other things when the season sort of goes down. And just because of the nature of the timing that we have in terms of, and the window we have to do work in the community, it's not 12 months a year. And so it's probably going to be like that for a while. But the baseline, for lack of a better term, is we set in 2020 with the goal of spending $5.1 million a year on capital in the ground needs, infrastructure needs.
And I'll just confirm what I said earlier. I continue to be hopeful that the critical infrastructure referendum will be approved, hopefully by the end of the summer. And we will be, if we can, billing those amounts, or with the hope that we can get some of that income in this year to offset what we've been using out of reserves.
Sure. Just closing comment that I know with the increased volume, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I fully appreciate that. I would just comment that I tend to hear more of the negatives associated with that when I listen to these types of meetings or hear, or like you said, listen on Facebook. And I just would put out there that I would encourage the board and everyone to welcome that and see it more as an opportunity, because I think it's good for everyone, and we should continue to be striving to make it the most attractive community for folks. And I really think that benefits everyone, whether you're renting or an owner or otherwise. I'm sure we will work through the fair and balanced way to cover those increased costs. But if we're not improving and growing, we're going the other direction. So I thank you for the focus on that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. Amanda, do we have any more?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Stray. We are going to move over to the next question. The next question, one moment, comes from David, excuse the pronunciation, it looks like it's Vittemeyer. Welcome, just allowing you to talk now. Well, welcome, David.
David, can you hear us? You may need to go off mute. You're currently on mute, David.
There we
There
go.
Thank you.
Yes.
Welcome.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Again, thank you for your service. One of the things I may have been thought of, but in an effort to hold down on the traffic within Sea Pines itself, has any thought been given to making that area to the right of the gate, Greenwood Gate, you could make that into a parking lot, a free parking lot, I guess, and restrict the number of cars per house, per unit in Sea Pines, especially some of the bigger houses. You could have 3, 4, 5 cars there, I would assume, and limit the number of cars to each dwelling to, I don't know, 2, whatever, and have the overflow park there. And if that was developed for something like that, then potentially put in a gate there as well to take care of the day tripper business that would again take the traffic away from the Greenwood Gate. Just a question: has that ever been considered?
Sam, I believe we do have the parking regulations that were adopted this past year that limits short-term renters to the hardscape. And if they have more cars, as they often do, and particularly in some of the larger homes, they do park in lot 1, don't they? We moved them over to lot 1.
Yeah, yes, sir, that is correct. And in addition, we're working with our merchants in the Harbortown area at Sea Pines Center. And you're gonna see some additional signage going up in the near future, encouraging visitors to park in lot 1 and take the trolley into Sea Pines Center or to Harbortown or to South Beach area. So we don't have the ability, or have not at this point, restricted day visitors from coming in and driving to wherever their destination is. But we're going to do our best to get folks to come in, take the trolley ride, take the kids, get out of the car, and let the trolley do the driving to try and get cars off the road.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, David. I appreciate your comments and good ideas. Amanda?
Our next question comes from Mr. Larry Sippy. Larry, I am welcoming you to speak. Welcome, Mr. Sippy.
Larry, good morning.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. My concern is safety on the bike paths. I'm concerned about, I don't have a problem with people like myself at aged times having an electric bike, but I have a problem with the electric bikes that can go 30, 40 miles an hour, and especially without use of pedals. And then they have a new one, looks like I don't know what the name of it is, but it's a little board with a wheel in the center that goes really fast. Those are becoming more and more popular, and they go fast on the bike paths, and I think they're very dangerous. Is there any way that we can consider looking at a way to control the use of these high-speed vehicles on our bike paths, especially within Sea Pines?
Larry, thank you for your comment. As I noted earlier, this is an issue that we have been studying for the last 6 to 8 months. We've actually talked to some of the outside Sea Pines vendors about it, urging them not to rent to anyone who's trying to use it in Sea Pines, and a couple of them have been quite good about that. We are looking at, and I'll turn it to Sam in terms of what the things we're considering.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mississippi, I do agree with you. I think there is an opportunity for electric bikes that are pedal assisted in the lowest classification to help folks that need the help. In fact, we on occasion will approve folks to use a pedal assisted bike if they contact us, if they have a physical limitation or any issue that we think makes sense. The key in everything you just said there is speed for us. And at the end of the day, what we've got to do is we've got to make sure folks are behaving on the leisure pass, whether they're on a 12 speed or an electric bike. and that really is becoming our biggest challenge. I don't think there is a place for the higher speed electric bikes on our leisure paths. I don't think you'll see us moving towards that in any way, shape, or form. You are going to see us putting up some speed limit signs on our bike paths, and we're going to do our very best when we see folks that are behaving dangerously on those bike paths to slow them down and to understand, let them know that the use of a bike path is not a right, it's a privilege. And if you can't behave on the bike path, then you're not going to have that privilege here in Sea Pines. So we're working more on that. Unfortunately, those are staff intensive issues. So it takes people to be out and about to do that. And so that falls in the category of a need that's also a want for us that we've got to find staffing solutions to do, because it's just like any other, I'll admit, going down the roadway on occasion, I may go over the speed limit. And fortunately, recently I haven't had any law enforcement catch me, but they will. And we got to have bodies out there to do that, to catch folks that are doing that and get the message out. We do a really good job communicating to our rental community about that the bikes aren't allowed. But at the end of the day, the enforcement piece falls back on us when we see folks on those paths doing things they shouldn't be doing.
And Sam and I have talked in this with security as well, is once you put the speed limit signs up, which I think is a terrific idea, you have to have someone at least on a regular occasion riding that can enforce it when they see someone going too fast. So if that all goes back into the revenue task force needs for additional security staff. But Larry, Ms. Shipley, I appreciate those comments. Again, I am really hopeful that the board this year will come to a way of accommodating all types of technologies and still maintaining safety on the bike paths, because safety is the most important thing on those leisure trails.
Thank you. Maybe as a resident, we can help remind people that they're not behaving in the proper way.
I certainly hope so.
And if you see someone who's not, please call our security. They're out and about all the time, but having residents call us and let us know if there are issues is probably the most direct way that we're able to deal with things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Amanda, next.
Thank you, Mr. Sippy, for that question. We are moving down to the next question, and that question comes from, it looks like Denise Berkler. Welcome, Denise.
Denise, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I actually have two questions. My first is kind of back to the financials and the budget. And as you talk about the revenue task force, has it been factored in or considered that, it's in a way the volume of renters and the volume of people is somewhat of a blip, or, a short-term 2 to 3 year kind of thing because of COVID and people not traveling internationally. Obviously, I rent in the summer. I've seen a huge increase because of that. Other times of the year, people wanting the property now because they're not traveling other places. But I guess my question is, in the long-term plan, the 3-year plan looking out, has it been factored in that this could be, somewhat of a blip, and that in 3 years from now, you're going to see it go back to a little bit more what we would consider normal levels?
Denise, thank you. I'll let Sam and Victoria look at that. One of the things we need to keep in mind is by the board adopting these fees, they will have the flexibility to maneuver them to meet the appropriate challenges. I'd like to think that inflation will stop growing as fast as it is on our compensation and our needs, to the extent that we find I hope someday we can say we're overstaffed in security. I'm sure Sam does as well. But since the board will have the ability to not only set the fee, adopt the fee, but to set its rate, that's certainly something that the board, I'm sure, will take into account from year to year. Sam?
The only thing I would add to that is I'm not sure that that's a trend that we're going to see here in Sea Pines. Reason being is Sea Pines was designed to be a resort community, and it is world renowned. And what we're seeing, particularly in the state of South Carolina and the Southeast, is more people are moving to the Southeast. And what we're finding is that folks, when they want to go rent a beach house, they're looking at Sea Pines. And so the number of people coming to this region continues to expand, the availability of beach houses and rentals is going to expand with that because of the market. What we're seeing is we're seeing folks that aren't necessarily ever a resident of Sea Pines. They're property owners, they're members of this organization, but they've made the decision to buy a property to turn it into an investment piece of property for rental purposes. And that's certainly allowed inside the community. And we're actually seeing more and more of those type of property owners as members of our organization. And the old saying is they're not making any more beachfront property. They're certainly not. So I don't think I could be wrong, but I believe as the population pressures continue to rise here in South Carolina and the Southeast in general, I think Sea Pines will continue to be a destination for folks that want to come rent and be a part of the beach. And so when the folks that want to get on an airplane and go to other places do so, the folks that maybe hadn't come to Sea Pines in a while, I think they'll begin to fill that void. That's just pure speculation on my part, but where the population growth is, I think the pressures will stay on us for that.
I just wanted to add that we do budget on an annual basis, and those budget numbers for gate revenue are based on very recent historical data. So we're not budgeting 4 and 5 years out at a different level. So we kind of try and keep that annual budget with the trending that we're seeing currently.
I thank you. I understand that. But I know obviously as you're looking at a revenue task force for ongoing revenue that won't be just for this year. I just want to make sure that it was also it could fluctuate, obviously, and that would be looked at, not like, all of a sudden there's a fuel surcharge on your trash bill, or there's a, increase or something. And those never come off, whether the fuel prices go down or not. It seems like they never, it's there to stay. So I just want to make sure that it's something that is, looked at. I'm from the business world, and we would always forecast out 3 years. And if things change, you're obviously going to change the numbers. And, we wouldn't base a product increase necessarily only on certain information from just this year. We would look out for ongoing years. So that's my only point on that.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you. One other quick question that I do have is,
Sure.
I live on Green Heron Road, and I'm not frequently there in the summer. I'm there in the spring and fall. But what I've been told, and I think from, looking at the social media pages, which aren't always the best to look at, but is it true that there's parking at this private school, and that the Green Heron and the roads around there get inundated with people walking to the beach over the summer?
Yeah, Denise, I'm going to speak first to it. When the resort, which for a few years allowed beach parking by residents and their guests at the Plantation Club, took that away. And even actually when it was there in the peak periods, there was not enough parking for residents, and to the extent that the resort guests also had access. And so we felt it was not inappropriate to provide a reasonable opportunity for parking by residents close enough to the beach so they could walk to the beach, whether it was from the club course area or those places along Greenwood Drive or north of Greenwood Drive. And so we worked with the school to in fact allow the school for parking. And that, I'm sure, that did in fact provide more people going to those parts of North Sea Pines Drive access than ever before. But we have to remember that all of those beach accesses and all of those beaches, the beach accesses are available to all property owners in Sea Pines, and the beach itself is actually available to the public. And so while I understand that this was a change in circumstances for those who lived along those areas, that suddenly they saw more people, more traffic, it really was just because as we have more and more occupation in Sea Pines, you're going to have more of those situations where people are using more access. So while I understand the concern that's being raised by those who live along North Sea Pines Drive that didn't used to see a lot of people walking on the beach, that's really just a matter of they were lucky that we didn't need that extra parking. Now we do. And it is limited to property owners. You can't, short-term renters can't park there. Daily visitors aren't supposed to park there. It's limited. So I understand the concern, but it really is a matter of the trend of more and more people in Sea Pines needing more and more places to access, park and access the beach. Sam?
I think that covers it. Really focused on property owners because of the fact that the spaces were filled at the beach club and Tower Beach was at maximum capacity, and there were hours and hours upon end where property owners couldn't find a place to park. We were trying to meet the needs of our property owners.
Okay, I understand that, but also those are different circumstances because they're not walking down streets that would normally, when we bought the property, it was never a consideration that there would be parking nearby that people would be walking. So I understand the point that you're trying to make more parking for people, but it's also wasn't a designated spot at one point in time.
And Denise, I appreciate that. There are many of us who lived in Club Course never thought we would see short-term renters in Club Course, but we do now. This is really part of the change in environment that we are seeing as Sea Pines has become what I continue to refer to in my letters as fully occupied. And things like they used to be no longer exist. We see more and more people, we see more and more opportunities for residents that need to find residents. We see more and more short-term renters where they never existed before, in some cases, overwhelming streets well away from the beach. So again, I've tried to make this point in some of my letters. We are all going to face different circumstances today than we did 5 and 7 and certainly 10 years ago. We've owned our place since 2002, and we see a difference. We used to be able to, in the worst of parking lots that ever existed at the beach club, when it was raining and it was muddy, we used to still be able to find a spot. Now it's not so easy. And Tower Beach was never crowded. These other areas on North Sea Pines Drive, and I'm certainly sympathetic to the fact that those of us who've been here a long time are seeing a different environment, but it is the fact that we all live in a place that's extremely popular.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for taking the time to comment. Amanda?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Denise. So we're moving to the next question, and that question comes from Candy Reynolds. Candy, welcoming you to speak. Welcome, Candy.
Good morning, Ms. Reynolds. You want to take yourself off mute, please? Thank you. Welcome.
I have 3 questions. The first 2 are pretty quick and easy answers. We've been a property owner in Sea Pines for, it'll be 42 years this October. So we've seen a lot of changes through the years. First of all, I'd like to commend CSA for all the work they've done through the years and all the work that everyone here at the table has done. I think you've done tremendous work, and I don't envy you all the feedback you get, good and bad. The good is good, the bad sometimes makes it very stressful to do your job. So thank you for everything.
Thank you.
But I had first 2 questions are pretty simple to answer. I listened to the board meeting that you had recently, and you mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, about 200 outstanding homeowners that had not paid their assessments. Do you have an update on that?
Yes, we do. It's about 130 now.
Okay. And what is being done long-term? Because it's all money towards the infrastructure long-term. I know you're going to short-term rentals passes will not be allowed, but I mean, long-term, what do you do to gain that money back?
Well, we will put a lien on somebody's property. We usually do that effective June 1st. If they have not paid their assessment, we will put a lien on their property.
And it's bearing interest, right?
Correct.
And we will recover all of our costs associated with placing the lien when we go to court, as well as court costs. So there will be no cost to CSA out of pocket to recover that assessment at the end if they don't pay the lien or when the property is sold.
Okay. And then the other question is, having been down there for many years, I've seen the traffic increase on the bike trails as well. First of all, I thank you for widening them where you can. But I noticed that at Sea Pines Center is pretty much the only spot where there has been a sign placed on the stop signs that says, basically, traffic has the right of way. Is there a reason you're not doing that on the rest of the bike trails? Is that not value added? I know we don't want any accidents for sure, but is there value in doing that on the rest of the stop signs throughout Sea Pines? Would that help?
It's something I'll certainly give consideration to. It may help to do that. I don't have an answer for you why there's one there. It was probably before my time, but certainly that is one of the biggest struggles we have is getting bikers to recognize that motorists have the right of way.
Okay, well, it's just, and obviously we don't want any accidents, but at Sea Pine Centers on the actual post, there are signs. I know there's a big A-frame, but there's signs below the stop sign and it's not throughout. So if it's value added, it's something to consider. If we don't feel it helps, then maybe it's not worth the expense, but I thought I'd bring it up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, the other question I had goes back to the one, I believe, to piggyback on the one the gentleman named Reagan was talking about, and I had made some notes earlier before he spoke, so I'll piggyback on that. I had, again, listened to the board meeting, and you talked a lot about, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, you talked a lot about the increase in the expenses, be it staffing, be it police/security needs, salaries, et cetera, going up as Sea Pines has grown and just basic economics. But the rentals have gone up significantly. And we have owned a place for 40 years, but have never rented it. And so my question is, can you talked a little bit at the board meeting, I don't know if you're at liberty to talk now, about strategically then, if a certain faction is causing a significant rise in the need for staffing, can you talk a little bit about what the plan is to generate that revenue going forward? And if not now, at some point in the future, so that maybe it won't have as big enough impact to the homeowners that don't rent as those that do? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, thank you, Ms. Reynolds. So the Revenue Task Force looked at the trend, and certainly since 2017, I think was the way we went back, 2017, there's been a significant increase in calls and a significant increase in short-term renters and a significant increase in security calls related to them, much greater than the growth in calls related to residents, people who are using their property owners who are in residence at the time. And so it is our hope, it is my hope, and the board will be considering one of the revenue sources would be a license fee on a registration fee on businesses. The board has not decided yet whether to do that, but that is certainly something that they will consider. And that would be designed to increase the amount of revenue, hopefully passed through to renters, so that we are essentially charging the people who are creating the issue, the renters themselves, what I would hope would be considered over the course of a full summer or so of renters, a modest amount in increased rent for the amount of money we have to do. Now, that's a board decision and it hasn't been reached, but that is what the Revenue Task Force has proposed. One of the revenue sources being a registration fee from the people who rent, which hopefully would be passed along in some form of rental increase to the people who are renting and causing the large number of security calls.
Has there been any discussion about raising the gate passes going forward? I know we've raised them recently. We've raised them a couple of times, but I know you talked about the numbers increasing, I think somewhere over 50,000 over the last 2 years to over 80,000 last year. Any discussion around raising the gate passes, or are you at a point where you think we are? That
is also on the table. It requires approval of not only CSA, but other parties, and there is nothing that's off the table. There's a potential for raising the commercial passes and or the daily passes still being considered by the board, and I would expect certainly some gate pass additional revenue to come through from the Revenue Task Force proposals.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And if I can add, Larry,
Sure.
As we move through this, whatever the board comes up with, the goal is going to be completely communicate this to the community in a way that everybody has full understanding of what's going on, what we're looking at, just like we've been doing with the needs assessment through it.
Right.
Okay.
And I appreciate your comments, Ms. Reynolds, and I appreciate the fact you've been here as long as you have and stayed with us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Amanda, next.
Our next question comes from Edna Biderman. Welcome, Edna.
It's Biederman, by the way.
Biederman, my apologies.
Hello, Ms. Biederman.
Hi, before you talked about the quote bike paths, and I think that's a problem. We can't call them bike paths. I'm 75. I walk 4 miles a day. That's my exercise. I can't walk on the leisure trails because I'm run over. I end up walking early or late on the golf course or on the streets because the people consider them bike paths. They don't consider them leisure paths. They don't bother telling you they're passing. They go 20 in a row and take over the paths completely. I think we have to either call them leisure paths or call them walking paths that we allow bikes on, because the mindset that they're bike paths seem to give people the right of way on them, not only on the paths, but on the crosswalks. And I've read a recent report that I believe either the county or Hilton Head itself has more bike accidents per capita than any place else in the United States. We don't want to be that. But people think they come here, they're on vacation, and you better get out of their way. I know other places have 2 paths, one for walkers and one for bikers. I know in Rhode Island, the walker, it's one way, walkers walk one way and bikers on the same side, so the other way, so you see each other. That has to be a better way than what we have here.
Stephen, thank you. And I apologize. I truly understand them to be leisure trails, and that's the way we consistently write them. Maybe every once in a while, a senior moment brings back the days when we called them bike paths, but they are leisure trails, and you are correct. They are shared. I know in Washington, D.C. and even in New York City, there are areas where there are truly bike paths for bikers that are off the sidewalks. Although every once in a while, you'll see a delivery guy on the sidewalk. I wish we had the luxury of having enough space on our roads, but we don't. But I do think, I do hope that as we implement some of the ideas that Sam's put forward in terms of speed limits and enforcement, that will help reduce the concern that you have of being a walker on our leisure trails shared with bikes. I wish we had better courtesy by bikers. I know when I'm biking, I always I use my bell. I mentioned it on the left, and bikers should be trained to deal with walkers and other bikers appropriately so that people have warning they're coming. Sometimes it's frustrating because some walkers, I doubt it's one who has their earpieces in and they've got their music so loud they don't hear you anyway. But the bottom line is it's a shared environment. And much as we share the roads with other cars and we're courteous as people are passing or whatever, we do need to do as much as we can as a community to train people to deal with leisure trails for bikers and walkers. But I hope that imposing speed limits will help by making them safer just as a general matter, so we don't have people speeding. And I hope we can continue to recognize that they are truly leisure trails for both bikers and walkers. And I appreciate your comments in that regard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Amanda.
Our next question comes from Miss Candy Reynolds. Candy, welcome back.
Ms. Reynolds, welcome.
Just one other quick comment, and I apologize to the young lady named Edna, because I agree with her totally on the leisure trails. My thanking you for widening them is that it's easier to walk now in those areas, because I too am an avid walker and don't ride the bikes that much. My question is there something you can do to follow up with the rental companies to ensure that they are educating the people that rent the bikes? I know we've seen the little yellow sheets that talk about telling people that they're on your left when they drive past you. And I probably see maybe 1 in 15 to 20 people that do that when they go by me in many times high rate of speeds. Are we doing anything to educate some of the tourists better, or is that just maybe not worth the squeeze?
We do a couple of things, and it's always worth the squeeze when it comes to safety. That is always going to be our number one priority on anything we do at community services. We send all our rental companies, our rental property management companies, the rules and regulations, and I will make sure that we put an emphasis on bicycle courtesy as well as bicycle safety on our leisure paths. I think, and the other thing I will do is make sure that our director of security, Toby McSwain, who does a fantastic job, communicates to the bicycle rental companies that it's not just about being safe on the bike, it's being courteous on the bike. And I observe on regular occasion folks that probably hadn't ridden the bike in many years, if ever, and they don't necessarily understand or know the rules of the road. And that really is incumbent upon the rental companies to make sure the folks that are renting those bikes to have an understanding of what their responsibility and in some cases and liability is when they decide to get on that bicycle. So I will double check and make sure both those things are going on from us in the strongest language possible.
And we do meet with we have a twice a year, we meet with the rental companies, and we invite any property owner who rents directly to be part of that meeting. And bike safety and walking safety on our leisure trails is certainly a subject that we emphasize. I know friends have rented places that have 3- and 4-page books. Some of our rental management companies are better than others, but it ultimately does come down to a renter who's come down for a week on vacation, taking the time to read it and then understand it and live with the rules. But we do, I assure you, we work as closely as we can with those who rent out to renters. And I'm hoping property owners, when they have their grandchildren and children in, are doing the same thing because when they're on the bike trails. It is an area that we can do more, and we will try to do more, up to the point where we simply have to enforce whatever we can on the leisure trails.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just wanted to check. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Amanda, are there any more?
There is one additional question. It looks like it from Cal Minster. I believe this might be Alicia who spoke earlier. Welcome back, Cal and Alicia.
Hey there. So listening to everything you guys are saying, and this is something when I listened to the board meetings before, I kind of thought of, there's a certain number of homes in Sea Pines, and not everybody goes to their homes. Not everybody rents that doesn't go to their homes. And so I guess I'm wondering, like, why are we not staffing for the number of homes that are in the area? Because there's this attitude that the renters, they're coming in and they're ruining our area. And it's like, it could still be homeowners, but it's also this concept that Hilton Head has always had, just people that visit periodically and then they leave their home empty for a while. And it's like, for us that come, maybe half the year or rent half the year, and then it sits empty half the year, we're not a burden. But it sounds like we are, because there's this attitude that the renters are taking over. And honestly, we have a 1-bedroom condo. We let 2 people stay. These big homes that allow 20, it seems like they're more the root of the issue, if you will. But I keep hearing like the daily gate pass is a big problem. So why are we not just increasing the daily visitors cost, not just to the renters, not just to the homeowners? Because as a homeowner, if I lived there full time, I would be frustrated that what I'm hearing from you guys is that these renters are taking over and they're increasing the cost. But really, shouldn't we be providing enough security that if all of us wanted to be in our house at the same time with the right amount of people, that we could, and it wouldn't be a burden?
Well, thank you, Alicia. We have everyone pays an annual assessment, and for a long time, that even with renters and folks using the timeshares, that seemed to be sufficient if we were fully staffed, which occasionally is a problem. It's only in the most, and we had a relatively stable number of rental properties. Over the last 5 years or so, that has jumped. And so have the need for security calls. And so what we're seeing is, I understand what you're saying, that if no one rented, wouldn't the assessment be enough? It well may be, other than for the cost of the infrastructure that goes up. We might be able to meet our needs as we did for a long time. but that's not the case. It isn't the case. And so we're trying to assess where the additional burden seemed to be, not, and that can't be covered by the assessment. Is it a perfect solution? I wish I could say it was. No, there is no perfect solution. When it comes to the daily and other gate fees, we will do what we can to increase those as well to add to the cost. And we'll look at other potential sources. But it seems indisputable from the data that as we have seen a significant jump in rentals, we have also seen a significant, and rentals that are spread throughout the community, and renters that are in fact where there is a large number of people residing in a house that was probably not built for that many, but can accommodate them. And they're here for a week or two. And I don't expect, I know when we go on vacation, whether it's to a hotel or a villa, yes, we try to be very respectful of the rules of the community, and we're probably the age where we're not partying too late anyway. But I don't expect a renter who comes in, a family or several families who come in for a week, to the first thing they do is figure out what the rules of the road are. They're respectful when told. I'm very pleased to note that when the land use manager or security makes a call, it's a rare situation where the renter doesn't say, gee, I'm sorry, I didn't know. But they are creating problems. And so we're trying to find a solution that allows for enough security and enough land use management and enough leisure trail enforcement so that we keep Sea Pines, if not bring it back, but certainly keep Sea Pines as the safe and healthy and family-oriented environment, which is family-oriented for the renter as well.
Right.
And so it isn't a situation where if we went back to where most people were property owners or full-time or part-time users of their place, and there was a limited number of renters, I think the assessments may well have been enough, but that's not the case. So we have to deal with the fully populated, as I consistently call Sea Pines, and what we need in light of the limitations on our assessment.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Well, partially. I guess I just, I do look at Facebook and I take it with a grain of salt. I know that there are highs and lows and you got to be in the middle. And I feel like I'm a pretty middle ground person in general. I just overall hear from you guys that we need a lot more money. You want to raise gate prices, raise money for the people that rent. And then I think there was a third thing. I can't remember what it was. I just feel like the renters are or the people that do rent, the burden is being placed a little heavily on. I'm not saying that maybe we bring some more to the table than others. I personally don't believe my unit that has 2 people in Harbortown does. I think the fact that the quarterdeck was just remodeled is probably going to bring a lot more people than my, condo that has 2 people for the day. And so I just feel like I have read some of the things you've put out in the past, but I don't know that it's as detailed as I feel like it needs to be for the money that needs to be brought in. An understanding of who really is affecting the problems, like Sea Pines Resort brings a lot of people in. The golf courses bring a lot of people in. The quarterdeck is now going to bring a ton of people. I don't know that it's all on the burden of renters. I think I have guests that stay on near Coligny who go to Sea Pines for the day. So I don't think it's all the burden of people who rent in Sea Pines. I think in general, Sea Pines is a cool and fun place to be. And I feel like maybe a more critical look at the daily visitors and their burden versus, the security calls, because there are homeowners who call every week about noise. And it's like, but the answer, it's not in their purview. Why are you bothering them with this? Like, that's not something you should go to them about. But I get it. We all want a fair share of, using our security services. I have not called security for anything other than, what do I need to do about this guest, getting a parking pass? So I guess I'm just a little frustrated because I feel like I just keep hearing it's about the renters and they're just overusing our services and we got to find some way to charge them. And I'll tell you from what I see in social media, that is a frustrating point for a lot of us because not all of us are booking our place 365 days a year and bringing this burden, And so I think that's where there's a lot of complaints on our side of you only want to raise the rates for us, you know, maybe
Alicia,
the annual assessment needs to be raised for everyone.
Alicia, I hear you. I know the board hears you, and all of that is being taken into account. And I'm sure that no matter what happens, there will be some who feel overburdened because they aren't created. And maybe in your case, you've got two people in a one condo. And there'll be others who feel that we haven't gone far enough. There's no perfect solution, but the board, and I do assure you that the board is taking into consideration all of these comments and will make what it believes is the fairest decision. Much as any government has to impose some taxes that are, I'm sure, felt uncomfortable and unfair to half the people who pay them, and not the other half feels you're not taxing enough. But I appreciate your, I don't want to minimize the concerns you've raised because they are being considered by the board, and as are all of the other discussions that we've had. So thank you for taking the time to raise them.
Thank you. When would these decisions go into place?
Well, that's something the board's going to have to decide, given where we are in the year, and what we could believe the impact will be on those who would have to pay the fees. So that's a decision that still hasn't been determined.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Amanda?
Thank you for that question, Alicia. And we are moving to what looks like our last hand raised, and that is Mr. Rodney Barstein. Welcome, Rodney.
Thank you very much. Thanks for all you do, you guys. I know it's not easy, but I've been coming to Hilton Head for about 35 years, been a property owner for about 15 years. And I want to address also the bike pass and issues associated with that I've seen. When I assume that when the land use people laid out Sea Pines 50 years ago, they really didn't forecast the number of automobile increases per household over the next 50 years. And what I want to specifically address is the crossovers of the bike pass across some of the major streets, specifically on Greenwood Drive by the nature preserve. I think it's extremely dangerous for bicyclists who are crossing that path. I appreciate the fact that several years ago, you guys modified the bike pass at Lighthouse Road and I guess Plantation to eliminate a crossover of the street for people heading in certain directions. But I don't know if there's a way we could put some, I hate to do it, flashing lights, force cars to stop and have some type of button so that it puts a red light there. The cars are going way too fast for the people that are trying to cut back and forth on that bike path. And a lot of it's the bicyclist's fault. They don't slow down. They think they can beat the cars and they speed up and just cut across. So those are my thoughts, and just wanted to see if there was any plans in the forecast to maybe take another look at the way the paths are laid out, and because things are different than they were 50 years ago when there probably were a lot fewer cars and fewer people walking and biking.
Thank you, Rodney. I'll let Sam add to this, but I can tell you that leisure trail safety is at the top of the list all the time. And whether you're driving through and hoping that the biker recognizes they don't have the right of way, or hoping that the car in front of you understands that it has the right of way and doesn't stop short, whatever it may be, these are issues that we face all the time. And they have, because the so-called peak season has expanded now, basically April to late October, it's an ongoing problem. But it's at the top of our list, and every idea that comes up is considered and given strong thought. Sam?
The only thing I'll add to that is when we make decisions on crossings and any road work, we do it through our traffic engineers, and safety is always the number one priority. That interchange was done prior to me coming on board. I'm happy to have our traffic engineer take a look at that and see if there's a way to improve that crossing and see if what ideas they can come up with and bring those to the Safety and Security Committee and then to the board.
Much like the signage discussed earlier.
Yes.
Yeah, one other thought is, and I don't know east or west, but the bike path that's on the cemetery side of that road eventually crosses to the other side where the nature preserve is. Maybe if that bike path could, one day, if it's ever expanded or you're renovating, just keep it on the same side of the road the entire distance from the gate all the way down to the cemetery so that there is no crossover. Again, I don't know what the right of way looks like. I don't know what property is available, but as we start spending money redoing bike paths, let's think about, is that really the best place for the bike path going forward? Or should we look at changing the way, eliminating a bunch of crossovers for safety reasons? Because this summer, when there's a lot of cars on that road, it's going to be, a long time for some bicyclists to actually get across that road.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Amanda?
At this time, we have no additional questions or hands raised at the
Well,
moment, Larry.
I want to thank all those who stayed with us, and I particularly want to thank all those who took the time to comment. I hope it was valuable for you. And we look forward to your watching our board meetings over the next several months as we intend to move a number of the issues that I discussed today forward. And I'm hoping we will make a lot of progress on all the things that we discussed today. So thank you for your attendance, and we'll say goodbye. Amanda?